Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey and exploration through this particular set from the Criterion collection made very recently in this year of 2020. It's called Essential Fellini. And today I'd like to focus in on the third Blu-ray disc that is included in such set. And it sets forth the film by Fellini from 1953. And it is this one. I Vitelloni. Film from 1953, directed of course by Federico Fellini, and it stars Franco Interlenghi, Alberto Sordi, Franco Fabrizi, Leopoldo Trieste, Riccardo Fellini, and others. And the title, I Vitelloni, I understand it can be translated into English to mean, for example, a young calf, as in the animal calf. Also, it can be used as a phrase to refer to idle youth or idle young persons of the provinces. And I think that is and other phrases have been used to translate this phrase I Vitelloni into English. For example, young loafers, or people hanging around, young people, young kids, youths just hanging out. And the like. So, and therefore, I think this phrase is very apt, because if we think about the story, which is, of course, credited to Fellini and Ennio Flaiano and Tullio Pinelli, with the screenplay credited to Fellini and Flaiano. If we think about the story, we understand that it is essentially an episodic structure-based narrative focusing in on these particular youths in this provincial area of Italy, and how each of them has his own story about youth and also about day-to-day living, about the relationships with family and friends and lovers and the like. Also dreams and ambition, and how their time in this town and the relationships between and among the friends seem to either exhibit their hopes for something to come along in their lives, or perhaps it shows their sense of being idle and sense of not necessarily going anywhere on a professional level, but rather just spending the time, as it were, with their friends in this particular situation. And with this general setup, of course, we have the possibility of following these particular young men and the various choices that they make along the way, depending on their particular circumstances. And we see, as I indicated earlier, a very interesting episodic-like nature to each of these stories. It feels like it is a tapestry, a tableau, if you will, sometimes following one of the characters, then following another character, then following another character. But they are, of course, intertwined and interconnected because of the close-knit sense of the community among these friends, and also where they are provincially and geographically. And also in a sense of the connectivity as far as what their hopes are, either vis-a-vis their current situations, and also vis-a-vis what it is they dream of, and what it is they might seek, perhaps somewhere in this town or perhaps somewhere outside of it. And thus forms the crux, or the essential essence, really, about what it is to be a young person in one's youth and alive during this time. And so there's a sense of freedom expressed. There's also a sense of doubt and uncertainty expressed. There is also a sense of yearning and there's also a sense of wanting things of the moment and perhaps not realizing that things are gone until they are gone, and thus trying to retrace one's steps back towards one's youth, or, depending on who the character might be, trying to instead forge a path forward that could or could not ultimately compel certain characters to make decisions, to want to, say, extend beyond their particular situations as the I Vitelloni of the title, and instead perhaps pursue some other things in other places, in other cities, etc., thus pursuing the sense of ambition and future away from this place. So there are many varieties of approach and perspective given this general backdrop and treatment of the spirit of youth and these characters, again, depending on the characteristics of their personal situations, also depending on the treatment, if you will, of the various scenarios that, as I say, emerge in this episodic-like structure. This is, I think, the essence of the film I Vitelloni in terms of the plot and narrative drive. This film serves a very important function in the context of the filmography of Federico Fellini for a number of reasons. And in order for me to better enable me to explain the reasons why I think that is, let me now turn the conversation to a discussion of the supplemental material that is found on this particular Blu-ray disc. And from there, I will try also to elaborate as to why I think this is indeed a very significant film and very entertaining film. So turning to the supplemental material that's found here, we have, for example, a documentary which is described as being from 2004. It actually came from this earlier DVD from the Criterion collection of the film I Vitelloni at spine number 246. And the earlier DVD had the documentary called Vitellonissimo, and Vitellonissimo is now found as the first supplement on the I Vitelloni Blu-ray disc. Again, described as being from 2004, approximately 30-35 minutes, and it features a whole host of participants, including Leopoldo Trieste and Franco Interlenghi, Moraldo Rossi, Tullio Chesice, and Vincenzo Molica, and director of the Fellini Foundation, Vittorio Borarini. And these participants really provide excellent commentary on the history of the film I Vitelloni and the significance of the film in Fellini's career, and also specific anecdotes or other bits of information that help to illuminate the grandness and the specific value that is this film. And it is truly a great film for a lot of the reasons, for all the reasons that are cited in this great documentary. And so I recommend the documentary wholeheartedly. For example, Tullio Chesice mentions how the earlier films by Fellini, being Variety Lights and The White Sheik, were not, at the time of their release, considered to be critical successes. In fact, they met with a certain degree of criticism from the critics at large. And so if we understand that, then we can understand also that the third film, therefore, if we were to count Variety Lights as the first film in the Fellini catalog, and the second film being White Sheik, now the third film, I Vitelloni, is one where there's a lot of pressure put on Fellini, as Tullio Chesice describes it, because if this had been a failure critically, then that could have been the end of the career of Federico Fellini as a filmmaker and artist. But thank goodness the film met with a considerable degree of critical acclaim upon its initial release, and of course that acclaim has continued throughout the years, and quite rightly so, because it is it's a film that feels fresh and alive, and it has characters that we can all understand, and we can sympathize with their particular struggles and hopes and situations currently, and what they hope might happen in terms of various developments along the way. So in other words, there's a lot of things that one can access as a viewer here that makes this film very fresh and feel so alive. That's not to say, of course, that the other two films in the Fellini catalog were lacking in that department. I mean, on the contrary, as I've mentioned in those two videos, I think those films are superb, as do a lot of people who are Fellini fans and admirers, and we know this. But there is this consideration as far as the initial release pressures that were felt by Fellini around the time prior to the release of this film. But thank goodness the release met with a certain degree of critical success. And so that's one thing to keep in mind as far as the film's significance. Another thing to keep in mind is, of course, its role or its significance or its place in the context of a discussion of what we have referred to so far as Italian neorealism. Now, this is a very important discussion, I think, especially in the early period of Fellini's career, prior to and continuing on into his first few films as a director. Because, well, first of all, as we mentioned in past videos on Variety Lights and The White Sheik, even in those films, while there is, of course, what I would suggest is a sense of the Fellini-esque, there are undeniably certain connections and thematic concerns that could be said to be borrowing from a tradition that is Italian neorealism. And also, if we understand it, Fellini's career working with Rossellini prior to Fellini becoming a director in his own right means, of course, we understand that Fellini did have a place, if you will, or did come from working to a certain degree in the Italian neorealism tradition. And I think the comment made by Boardini here in this documentary is really great, because he is suggesting that this film perhaps could be one of the films by Fellini that is a very close turn towards the tradition of Italian neorealism by Fellini on the one hand. However, at the same time, it seems to also be a way in which Fellini is making further distinctions apart from the tradition of Italian neorealism. So certain themes that could be said to be borrowing from the Italian or reflective of the Italian neorealism tradition in this film are the way in which the youth are being depicted in these rural, provincial town settings that are real life, and they have this real life lived-in feel about them, and their concerns seem very much the concerns of everyday people. And we see them in situations that feel very much like they are borrowed from real life, or situations that could be said to be very much consistent with the real life day-to-day goings-on, if you will, of anyone who is young and alive and growing up in a particular small town. And so in those ways, I think it can be said to be having some connections with a realism portrayal or Italian neorealism portrayal. This is, I think, augmented even further by the fact that we can perhaps sense something of what might be said to be an autobiographical spirit in the air when we're watching this film, especially when we understand the background details of the biography of Fellini himself growing up as a young man, as a youth, and the types of situations that he and his friends got into. So there is a sense of perhaps a spirit that could be kind of autobiographical when watching this film. So in those ways, there is a sense of the real, or maybe something close or akin to the real, being portrayed in this film, I Vitelloni. At the same time, this is also a film that feels, according to Boardini, it feels like it's a very popularized depiction of these youths and their episodic nature, and the plot and structure, which is very episodic. And also there is a sense of a type of storytelling that is focused in not necessarily on the impoverished or or the poor, people in society that are afflicted by some kind of socio-political or economic crisis that is beyond them. But rather, this is focusing in on what Guarini describes as being the social misfit or the social outcast. And I think this is also a way in which we can further distinguish this film from the Italian neorealism tradition that we see from Rossellini and others, when we have focusing in on specific aspects of the impoverished or the poor, and the way in which certain external socio-political economic factors have affected their particular living situations. So this is, I think, very much a great argument. In other words, this feels very close to the real, but also it's an attempt to push away from the Italian neorealism tradition and more towards the realm of what we might see, say, in later films by Fellini, in terms of focusing in on social outcast or social misfit-like characters. We will see that in La Strada, Il Bidone, and Nights of Cabiria. And so even in a dialogue about those films, there is this interesting push and pull between what might be deemed closer to the world of the Fellini-esque in cinema, and also what might be deemed closer to the traditions of Italian neorealism in cinema. And so that conversation, I would suggest, has started with his earlier films, although I do think there is a swing in the pendulum towards one direction versus the other with those films. But it continues on in the discussion of the film I Vitelloni, as well as it will continue on in the next few films in the Fellini canon. But this is a very important point to bring up, and thus I really love this comment in the documentary, and it really illuminates how this film is therefore very significant in this period, this early period of Fellini's career, where he seems to be trying to work out his artistic character and his viewpoint, and he's already established it from the very get-go, but he is using themes and ideas and images that feel real, but also doing them focusing in on specific aspects that perhaps might be said to be a little bit apart from what we have otherwise seen from the films of Italian neorealism. Speaking of the aspect of what might be said to be the spirit of autobiography, I think this is a very important point to raise, because also in this documentary, Vitellonismo, this is very important. It is very clear that this is not a direct autobiographical depiction of Fellini and specific life events of Fellini's youth. This is very clear, and the participants have confirmed this as far as their understanding of Fellini's biography and his life. So this is not meant to be an autobiographical depiction of Fellini's life. Rather, there is a sense of, as it's described by the participants in the documentary, a sense of a spirit of maybe an autobiographical bent. In other words, it feels like it's borrowing from a general spirit or feeling of youth and freedom that Fellini himself felt. It's also borrowing from a sense of wanting to be part of a group like this. And it's also borrowing from a sense of for example, some of the characters and their artistic ambitions and wanting to leave the small town in favor of moving into bigger cities like Rome, etc. And so these do have echoes from Fellini's life as we understand it. And also the hometown could be an echo of the hometown Rimini, etc. Although we understand that it could be Rimini, but it's not quite Rimini in terms of the actual settings. And so these details bring to light the fact that while it is not a specific autobiographical film per se, it does have the spirit of that. And I think that is a very important distinction to make, but still, it is one that makes this film, I think, very much inherently a Federico Fellini film for those reasons. So this documentary is really, it's a must-watch. it's an absolute must-watch, and I'm so glad the documentary was carried over from the earlier DVD back onto this. And this is really great. So this is Vitellonismo, approximately 35 minutes. But that's not all, because then we get the second look program series that we first saw as a supplement in the first disc for Variety Lights. Here we get the second episode of this series. And it's approximately 31 minutes, and we get the interviewer interviewing Fellini and others. And as I mentioned in an earlier video, as part of the discussion here, we do get, for example, some discussion about how Fellini did work with Rossellini, and then when Fellini got his opportunity to work as co-director with La Tuada on Variety Lights, we get some information about how they worked together. There's also information about the White Sheik and Alberto Sordi, who is being interviewed here, and he's speaking French, I understand it, which is really great. And so Sordi talks about working on the White Sheik, and then it goes into a discussion a little bit of La Strada and the links with Chaplin and La Strada, and then it also goes into a discussion of I Vitelloni, and so it's a really great episode to watch, and I strongly recommend it. Well, how should I explain it? There are a lot of, as I say, mentionings of the fact that this seems to be echoing a lot of what might be perceived to be Fellini's life, but in fact, it's a lot more complicated than that. And so I think watching this second look episode is really valuable in terms of a discussion of Fellini's early works up to and around the period of I Vitelloni. So well worth checking out. Again, approximately 31 minutes. And then there is a stills gallery, which is approximately 3 minutes. And it's a stills gallery that's showing, for example, the photos of the Italian movie book of the film, also photo books from other countries, as well as poster art and lobby card art, etc. And it's shown in this automatically playing 3-minute montage sequence. It borrows from the earlier DVD, which had a stills gallery, which was you could navigate using the forward button and the backwards button, like a photo gallery itself. Although I should point out that the stills gallery here also had a section for film stills, photo stills, which apparently don't appear as part of the montage of the stills gallery for the Blu-ray disc. But still, we're getting a lot of examples of the poster art and also the some of the promotional materials at the time, etc. So it's very interesting and fascinating stuff. And then to round that out, we have a trailer for the film. A really great one, so please check that one out too if you can. So I should say once again that we did get this earlier Criterion DVD 246 by number. Now we get the film I Vitelloni, and it looks really great. I don't have any issues necessarily with the presentation of the earlier DVD, but I really am very pleased with the presentation here by Criterion. It's well worth checking out, and it is very significant for the reasons that I was trying to suggest in this conversation. This is the film from Federico Fellini, I Vitelloni. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it, my dear friends. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.